I'm doing the recording now.
Keep myself comfortable.
This picture, I recognized that from the other night, but I can't remember who it was. That must be Cynthia. Was Cynthia?
I don't know.
Yeah, I can only see 4 people at a time, so I have to keep rotating the
You know, for
screen.
those of you who can't see all of us, you can change the view to gallery
Yeah.
view, and then you see all of
Gallery, everybody.
upper right corner. Go to the gallery view.
View, and then you hit
Let's
gallery.
see.
Uh,
Where's you leave?
Upper right-hand corner.
oh, I see it says leave. I don't want to hit that button.
No,
Yeah,
no,
that's the
no.
only one I have too. It says
Top.
leave.
Very top.
Upper right corner.
Well, top right corner says leave.
Oh,
I think we may not have that capability on a tablet.
You should, you should.
Okay.
I've never been able to do it.
Can everybody see me on this thing? I don't know what the hell I'm doing here.
Yeah.
yeah,
I saw it.
everybody sees you. You're looking good.
Oh, great. Let me fix my hair at least. Jeez.
No, you're looking good. It's fine. Hey, it's Friday afternoon. It's Friday night. Come on.
So should we
Okay.
show us?
It's 6 o'clock.
I'm still having people
That-
come
that's
in.
You, but if you want to leave early, it's going to be obvious. No, we can, no.
Okay, so whoever's talking, this is what I suggest, I mute all and then unmute you and Jim. Paul.
Mute all, yeah.
Paul.
So do I need a coaster? Nah.
A lot of people on.
Paul, so I said Paul.
All right, Kathy, are you ready to go?
Yes, I will be still, the only difficulty I have is that once I put the PowerPoint on full size, I can't admit people. So that's what, right now, people are still coming. So it would be ideal if you could present a little bit before we start.
Yeah. My intro will be probably about 5 minutes, including the
That'd be
raise hand
perfect.
test.
That'd be, because Boulder's like that, so it's perfect.
All right, well then let's just go ahead and get started, and you can, as soon as I'm done, you can go ahead and go to PowerPoint, and then
Thank you.
we'll go from there.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So, on behalf of the BoulderExo team, good evening and welcome to Jim Meyer's presentation on Sasquatch consciousness. I'm Paul Sperry, and it's my pleasure to moderate this presentation from Longmont, Colorado. Our speaker is remotely connected from the high country near Bailey, while Kathy Mason's conducting the show from Boulder. I want to acknowledge the rest of our team responsible for this event, including Paula Harris, Ross Locklear, Julia Steiner, Cynthia Marsh, and Marianne Sperry. If you're wondering why BoulderExo would feature a talk on Sasquatch, Yeti, or Bigfoot, realize that both they and UFOs share many similarities. Both are viewed by some as a myth, yet sightings persist worldwide. Both reportedly share the ability of cloaking and shapeshifting. As a mystery to be understood, both may provide a glimpse of a consciousness that lies just beyond the veil. This Zoom call will be a bit different than most. In our attempt to simulate a personal experience, Jim will pause a few times during his talk where you can seek clarification. Instead of posting chat questions like you may have done in the past, which we would then have to sort out, we're going to instead raise hands as you might do during a normal talk in person. Longer discussions will then occur at the end of our presentation, as always. So, to ensure that you know how to raise your hand, move your mouse to the bottom of your screen, click on the reactions button, and then click raise hand. Do this now, all of you, so that we can see the hands up and know that you know where it is, and then we'll put them back down when we see all of them up. So I am seeing a few that are not up, but most of them are up. Shar, have you figured that out yet, where it is? Of course, You're muted.
Everyone's muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
Ross wasn't, Ross, your hand is
No,
raised.
I do. So I went into the reactions and I do not see hand. I just see a clap, thumbs up, heart, joy, yes, open mouth, and ta-da. That's it. So
All right,
there's no option for me.
try participants and see if it's there. Right.
That's all right. I don't need to do anything. Go to the bottom
Mm,
of the.
It's there, but it says raise hand above the icons that you described. Look at the
Yep.
top and in words, it says raise hand.
All right,
I
well, that's
think-
it. You know, if for some reason you can't get your hand raised, we can still see you. You know, so,
Usually, Paul, usually, I've been participating in a lot of those events from in a lot of overseas. It's basically same setup. It's the kind of what people do. It's basically do this. They say just do this. If you want to raise your hand, do this.
all right, well, we'll
Yes,
see
ma'am.
that too. So we've got most of them raised, and so you're all muted for right now. When we get to the first break point, you can unmute yourself, and we'll look at your raised hands, and we'll call on you. Kathy will call on you, and then Jim will respond. So that might be enough for now. I see Kathy's now lowered all the hands. So let's go ahead and get started. If anybody needs any technical assistance, you can send a chat message directly to Kathy. You go to chat, and then you can actually send the chat to only one person, and Kathy Mason's the one to send it to if you're having a problem. Okay, so I'm assuming we're all set, so let's get started. Jim Myers grew up in Kenya to missionary parents and lived 28 years in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. After returning to the United States in 2009, Jim got into Old West reenacting with the Clark County Regulators. In his role as Cherokee Jack, Jim and his dastardly crew rob the Georgetown Railroad in an armed holdup using long Colt pistols loaded with black powder blanks that produced lots of noise, sparks, and excitement. They reload their own blanks and admit to having more fun than middle-aged men should have. Jim's an avid Sasquatch researcher who, with his wife Daphne, have created a unique store and Sasquatch museum in Bailey, Colorado. They have filled their Sasquatch outpost with remarkable evidence and displays that is worth a day's trip up Highway 285 to Bailey. To give you some perspective, gorillas weren't even known until 1847, and that's less than 200 years ago. So without further ado, give a round of applause in your own homes for Jim Myers, who will speak to us on the intelligence and consciousness of Sasquatch. Take it away, Jim.
Well, thank you for that illustrious introduction. I appreciate that. And I think this talk first came about in a conversation I had with Ross after a meeting that I spoke at last year. Maybe it was a year before, I can't remember, but Ross and I got into a long conversation about Sasquatch and about consciousness. You remember that, Ross? And
oh yes, Jim. Yeah, no, me and you visited your store, and great time. A lot of interesting conversation. A lot of those pictures were quite intriguing. I've never seen anything like it before. So yes, thank you.
You got me thinking about it, and then I was asked to talk on this whole topic of Sasquatch consciousness, which is the first time for me to talk about it. It is a good challenge for me to break into another area regarding Sasquatch. Not that I understand very much about Sasquatch to begin with. Anyone that tells you they are an expert on Sasquatch or Bigfoot, don't listen to them, because there's no such thing as an expert on an uncategorized creature that's not even recognized by science. But you can go ahead and change the slide. And again. I can't tell which slide we're on, actually.
Wait one moment.
Waiting.
Hit F5 to get it started.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, so we want to talk about, you can hit down a couple times to get the text on that page. Sasquatch consciousness, which is an interesting topic. Is Sasquatch conscious? What does consciousness mean? Are they aware of themselves? Are they aware of people around them? Do they know what their place is in the world and how they relate to everything else? But let's give you a little bit of background. You can go to the next slide. As was said, my wife and I own the Sasquatch Outpost. That's the front of our store with our 9-foot Sasquatch on the front. This building was actually built in 1878. It's the oldest standing building in Bailey. And being like any old building in the West, it has its share of haunted stories. And when you walk in, the first thing you see is Diddley Squatch there between the two trees. And kids often have quite a reaction to Diddley Squatch. They don't always like him. He's one of several Bigfoot that we have in the museum. Okay, you can go to the next. And this is our main man, Boomer, who I built over about 3 months. Long story how we built him, but he's actually covered with llama hair. It was the only hair I could find that was real hair. If I were to do it again, I might change that to a different kind of hair, but he is 3D. He's 7.5 feet tall. And people often miss him in the museum, even as big as he is. It's easy to miss Boomer in the trees, which is intentional so that people can see that you can walk in the woods and miss Sasquatch very easily. All right, next. And Paul mentioned the Park County Regulators. This is a picture of our team taken a couple of years ago when we did a promotional video at South Park City in Fairplay. And that's me right there. These are, not everyone is still with our team, but we have a lot of fun and shoot up Georgetown several times this summer. So if you've never ridden the Georgetown Loop Railroad, let's hope this summer will be a summer we can perform. It looks like we won't be performing till the end of August due to COVID regulations, but we'll get out there as soon as we can. But getting back to our store, we started the store in 2012. We started working on the store in 2012. It took us 9 months to rebuild what should have been a condemned building, and it was in horrendous shape. It needed a whole entirely new floor. So the floor, as you come into the store, the floor that you see was rebuilt 15 inches above the original floor because of some asbestos problems. I got angry at the county when they made me stop work on the building in order to get some permits. And so I put a sign on the window that said, we're doing as best as we can to get back to work. And that was not popular with the county or the state. I got in some trouble for that. So we can go to the next slide. Let me get my papers straightened out here. So a couple of things happened in 2012 that kind of changed our trajectory. We originally opened this store with the intent of having a grocery store and a mercantile. And that was the case in the beginning, but two things happened during those 9 months of rebuilding the store that were significant. The first was I met my first eyewitness, Bigfoot eyewitness, and it was a gal who was running the Bailey Lodge at that time. And she and her best friend were walking in the forest behind the lodge. Her friend was leaving the next day. They were not thinking about Bigfoot. They were not thinking about anything except having a chat before her friend left to go back home. It was still daytime, end of May, and they heard a branch crack over to one side, and they both turned and looked, and they saw this enormous creature running down the hill next to them, bent over, swinging its arms as it ran, did not look at them. It ran down the hill and disappeared into the trees, and they stood there looking at each other as probably anyone would for a moment. And one of them said, "Was that a deer?" Even though she said, "I knew it wasn't a deer, but I didn't know what to say. I knew what I'd seen." And the other woman said, "No, I think that was a Bigfoot." And they described it as having brownish gray hair and probably had it stood up, maybe being 7 feet tall. Neither of them were afraid for some reason. That was not an emotion they felt. In fact, they started calling Bigfoot, Bigfoot, come back, Bigfoot, because they wanted to see it again. So she took me, when I met with her over coffee and heard her story, she took me back to where this had happened. And on the hillside that it ran down, you could still see the pine duff kicked back about every 6 feet. There was a footprint in the pine duff. And so that was significant for me. And then the Animal Planet show Finding Bigfoot came to Bailey to do an episode, largely based on her sighting, but due to a number of other people as well. And by that time, I was really getting into the Bigfoot theme, and I had cut a Bigfoot out of plywood, and I had him holding a sign, and the sign said, "I don't believe the evidence supports the existence of humans." And I took that Bigfoot to the meeting, and I talked to the producer, and I said, "Hey, would it be okay if we put this Bigfoot out?" And they said, "Oh, maybe we'll use it for some B-roll." But in the end, they put it right next to the front door where the actors walked in and everyone saw it, which I thought was kind of fun. So I sat on the front row and make sure I could see myself on TV. And I sat there with about 110 people in this room who I didn't know where they came from. They came out of the woodwork. And I heard 7 or 8 people get up and tell a story about some experience they'd had with a Bigfoot in the Bailey area. So I was struck by that. And I remember going back home and telling my wife, I think there's something to this. And I think there's a lot of people interested in it. And we made the decision to name our store Bailey Country Store and Sasquatch Outpost. And we tried the groceries for a couple of years, and we were going to starve to death. We were the only ones eating the groceries, which wasn't the plan. And so after a couple of years, we decided to get rid of the groceries entirely, and we fully embraced Sasquatch, and we've never looked back since. So go ahead and hit the next. So Sasquatch in North America may surprise you. There's been sightings in every single state in the United States, and not just one. Most states have had many sightings, and to my knowledge, every single Native American tribe has a name and a tradition of Sasquatch in their tribal history. The Navajo call them Yeitso, the Sioux call them Chietonka, The Hoopa call them Oma. The word Sasquatch is actually from one of the tribes in the Pacific Northwest. The Choctaw called them Champe. So every tribe has their own name. Now, the interesting thing about these names is they're not names you give to animals. They're names you give to people. And they would say that Sasquatch is a person. It's a type of a person. They're a type of tribe. They're just different than we are. They call them the forest people many times. And if you think about Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and those terms are interchangeable, by the way, they are the most popular and most cited cryptid. In fact, I would hazard a guess here that if you took all the sightings of Bigfoot, there's probably more than every other cryptid combined. In fact, I personally feel like they should take Bigfoot off of the cryptid list. I don't believe they're a cryptid. I believe they're a real creature that deserves more recognition than just being called a cryptid. Okay, you can go on. Are they real? Well, of course they're real. And we're going to look at some evidence for that as we go. So the next slide is a slide of sightings in the United States from one source. This is from the BFRO over the last 100, maybe stretching it, say 80 to 100 years. And these are only the sightings reported to the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, which is the largest database. But there's many databases, and as unfortunately is the case in the Bigfoot world, there's a lot of territorialism between Bigfoot groups, Bigfoot research groups. We have our own database, which you're going to see in a moment, that none of our sightings, to my knowledge, are on the list that you just saw.
Oops, sorry.
That's all right. So this is a map that we've come up with just of sightings around Bailey. So Bailey being, if you could show on your cursor where Bailey is, down where the crook in the road is, to your right.
Stir to the right. There it is.
Right there's Bailey. So you can see the red indicate visual sightings, the black are footprints, yellow are tree structures that we believe Sasquatch has done. Green are vocalizations, and blue are things that have been thrown at people when they're hiking. And these are just people who come into our store, told us their story. This is just an excerpt of the map around Bailey. The map is actually 4 feet by 5 feet, and there's over 300 pins on that map. So multiply that in one little store in one little town in Colorado. There have to have been thousands upon thousands of sightings just in this state alone. And unfortunately, most people never talk about it. They don't want people to know because they don't want to be mocked or made fun of. I don't know if you heard the recent radio or report on the TV that there's an Oklahoma state senator wants to open a Bigfoot hunting season. He's bringing it before the Senate to this fall. He's hoping to have a Sasquatch hunting season. I don't know what his thinking is behind this idea. I'm certainly going to write my opposition to it. The last thing we need is people going out in the woods trying to shoot Bigfoot. But that's, and I don't think he'll get very far in the Senate because I'm sure most of them don't believe in Bigfoot to begin with. But that's kind of an indication of what people think about Sasquatch these days. Is it's a joke, it's a myth, it's something to go try and shoot. I can guarantee if people go out en masse and try to shoot Sasquatch, we're going to have some people get hurt or killed in the process, unfortunately. Okay. So I'm going to pause just for a second and see if there's any thoughts or questions.
So, thank you so far. And I'll point out to the watchers here, if you choose on your view to go to side-by-side speaker and presentation, you can slide the middle bar back and forth and make the map look bigger or make Jim look bigger if it helps you to see what you want to see.
Looks like there's a couple of hands.
And then if I go to gallery view, I'm looking for raised hands.
Shirley's hand is up.
And I see, okay, so Columbine and Julia
And sure,
um,
Shirley.
and Shirley are 3 questions.
Pick one.
Okay, so Shirley, you want to go ahead
Well,
and speak?
I noticed that there weren't any sightings in Mexico. Is that true, or was that just what was shown on
No,
that map?
There are sightings in Mexico. There are sightings in Canada. I just limited it to the
The
continental.
U.S. Okay, and then what is a cryptid?
A cryptid is an undiscovered, uncategorized species. Other
Okay.
cryptids would be Loch Ness Monster,
Okay.
Mothman, Chupacabra, etc.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, mute yourself. Julia.
Yeah.
Unmute,
Yeah,
unmute
that was
yourself,
my
Julia.
question. I'd never heard the word cryptid before, and I wanted to know what it meant. So that was my only question.
Yeah, it's cryptozoology, and it's all dealing with creatures that are thought to be legend in scientific circles.
Okay, thanks, Julia, and Columbine too.
Okay, there were a few of the vocal sightings or whatever reports. What kind of a noise or a whatever do they
We're
report?
going to hear some of those a little later on, but
Okay,
Um,
good.
I'll leave that. If your question isn't answered, when we get to that section, then ask it again.
Okay.
Okay, Susan, why?
Jim, I'd like to know, have sightings of Sasquatches or encounters increased over the years, decreased, or do they remain about the same from year to year?
That's a great question that we're often asked. They've always been there. There's reports going back into the 1700s in this country. I think there's more people in the woods now who have more technology, and so I think we're having more information coming at us about Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It's hard to say whether there's more than there used to be. I think there's more people in the woods, which would make it seem like Sasquatch is appearing more often to people, but this has been happening for hundreds of years.
Let's take one last question for this break, and that'll be Cedric. We're not hearing you.
I see John's hand. I don't see Cedric.
His mute went off, but I can't hear it, Cedric.
John has his hand up too. Back here, right here, John Wayne. Yeah, I can
Oh,
do that.
oh. Okay, I'm not hearing Cedric. John, I see your physical hand. Why don't you be the last question right
Unmute,
now?
John.
And don't forget to unmute.
Jim, I just kind of wanted to add regarding statistics that of the there are probably 40 or 50 people around Bailey that have reported that they've had sightings. I don't know any of them that have reported that to BFRO. And some of them have had multiple sightings. So, the statistics are really, really
Conservative, probably.
10x or 15x. Just
Yeah.
want that comment.
And
Okay,
just
so
to introduce John, was my primary research partner for many years, and I have some stories about John as we go along. So that's who that is.
okay, so as not to hold up Jim Shard, if you can hold your question until the next break, I'll make one comment. For those of you that seem to see Jim fading in and out on the video, he says that this is because of how he's projecting his imagery with the background. but I think he's been spending so much time with the Sasquatch that he's kind of fading in and out of phasing in and out. So there he goes. So with that, go ahead and let's continue.
Okay. So I'll wait for our next slide here. So Sasquatch consciousness and intelligence. Now, I'm hoping to prove as we go that, and in my museum, I do a lot to try and prove that I believe Sasquatch is conscious, has consciousness, and is intelligent. And I would hazard to say, not just from my experience, but many of the researchers, that the intelligence of Sasquatch rivals or even surpasses our own. I have people ask me, well, if they're so intelligent, then why do they live in the woods and they don't build houses? And my response is, since when is building a house a sign of intelligence? We build houses because we have to. We can't survive in the wild without shelter and clothing. Sasquatch doesn't have that need, and so they don't build things. They do build structures occasionally, but not like houses. But their intelligence is far more emotional intelligence, and they have a number of abilities that we seem to have only at an elementary level or do not have at all. But carry on just a little bit further down here. So what do we mean by consciousness? We need to define this a little bit. So one definition is the quality or state of being aware, especially of something within yourself. So self-awareness. Now, we know that humans have varying degrees of self-awareness. We've all known people who had habits or things that they were completely unaware of, and even when those things were brought to their attention, still couldn't see it. And so self-awareness, even among humans, is of varying degrees, but I believe that Sasquatch is self-aware, that they know who they are, they know who those are around them, and they have that level of consciousness that we would normally only attribute to humanity. Another definition is the state or fact of being conscious of an external object or state or fact, meaning how do they relate to the world around them? And they're extremely in touch with the world around them. They are far more in touch, I believe, with the world than we are in many different ways. And their awareness of how they relate to us as humans and to all of nature is amazing, actually, compared to what we have. Do the third one there. Or the state of being characterized by sensation, emotion, volition, and thought. They definitely have emotions. They definitely have a will. They are thinking, intelligent beings. They even demonstrate the forethought or even humor. I'll tell a story about John here, who I just introduced there. John was at one of our research sites where we had some gifting areas, and we'll talk about gifting in a moment. And on the way into this particular research gifting site, there were two tree breaks that we would attribute to Sasquatch. They had been there ever since John and I had started going to this location. They were right next to the trail. So anytime we would go in or anytime we would take someone else in, we would stop, we would look at these trees. We'd have people take their picture next to them. They were both broken, I would say about 10 feet up. The trees were broken, twisted, and left hanging, which is classic, we believe, classic Sasquatch manipulation of a tree. So John was by himself. He went in, noticed the two trees, went into the gifting area, was there about 30 minutes. On his way out, about 100 yards from the two trees, he noticed this branch sticking across the trail, right across the trail where he couldn't miss it. And he looked at that and he thought, this looks familiar. And he picked it up and he walked back, and sure enough, it was the top of one of those two trees that had been broken off while he was up the trail and then placed in the trail where it knew he would see it when he came back out. And so that demonstrated a lot of thought that they knew John, they knew where John was going. They knew approximately how long he would take. While he was up there during the daytime, they broke off the top of that tree and put it right across the trail. A human could not have grabbed that tree because of where it was located. It would have been extremely difficult for a human to break that off and then lie it across the trail. And John hadn't seen any other people that afternoon anyway. There was only himself. So that's an example of their insight and their thought of thinking things through. And there's many other examples like that. Okay, you can go on. So here's a question. Is it possible that Sasquatch is not simply an undiscovered species of great ape, which is the opinion of many, but that they are highly evolved creatures that demonstrate a surprisingly high level of intelligence, language ability, and even humor? And I hope to give some evidence for these things as we go forward. So we can move on. So still talking about consciousness and intelligence. So we believe that far from being a mere animal, Sasquatch is actually a hominid, a human, a type of human with close genetic ties to us. And they possess a level of intelligence that rivals, if not surpasses, our own. So what evidence can I give for this? You can go to the next slide. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard about the Sasquatch Genome Project. This project took place back in, the evidence began to be gathered in about 2008. The study, I think, was finally brought forward to the public in 2013. But the goal was to prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that Sasquatch exists through DNA analysis. Go on down. So it was a $500,000 study funded by private donations. So this was not an insignificant study. This was a very thorough study. There were 111 samples from around the country of what was thought to be Sasquatch hair, saliva, blood, and tissue that were submitted by researchers. And let me add here that these researchers and scientists took extreme pains to not contaminate their samples. Many of them already understood from a scientific perspective how to take a sample in the field without contaminating it. But the last thing they wanted was for human DNA to be mixed up with whatever DNA was going to be found. There were 12 independent laboratories across the US that were hired to extract the DNA and analyze it to see what it was from. Let me make another point here. Any hair that was submitted was first put through a vetting process by a hair follicle expert. We know now what, under a microscope, what deer hair looks like, what bear hair, human hair, fox hair. They each have their own morphology. And for an experienced expert, they can immediately tell by looking at a strand of hair if it comes from one of those known species. Sasquatch hair has its own morphology, and it's very different from any other hair. So any hair samples that were submitted to this study were first checked to eliminate any possibility that there was any other kind of hair that was known. And they realized with Sasquatch hair, the only way they could get DNA from it, for some reason, Sasquatch hair, you cannot retrieve DNA from the follicle. You had to have a skin tag at the end. So the hair had to have been pulled out by the roots, literally. So there was tissue attached at the end, which gave enough sample for a DNA analysis. One of the labs, before they knew what they were analyzing, because they were blind and double-blind studies, one lab, after sequencing the nuclear DNA and finding no matches with any known organism anywhere in GenBank, wrote an email to the author of the study saying, "What is this? Have you discovered a new species?" Which is significant that they said that before they knew what they were analyzing. But they recognized that this was something out of the ordinary that did not show up in the database. Okay, carry on. The DNA results, which were disputed by, go back quickly, if you can. Sorry about that. The DNA results were disputed by the laboratories as having human contamination, but what they revealed was that Sasquatch is a human hybrid, meaning the mitochondrial DNA, which is the female side, was human. The nuclear DNA, which is the male side, was unknown, did not appear anywhere in GenBank. There were no matches anywhere that had ever been submitted to GenBank, and there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of samples of any known mammal that are in that bank. The nuclear DNA did not show up at all. So carry on. So the lab said that they contaminated their samples with human DNA. That was their explanation. Now this is a picture, a close-up of one of the Sasquatch that was, whose hair was used in the analysis. This is one they named Matilda. Now, Matilda was part of a family group of Sasquatch from Kentucky at a habituation site where a group of researchers were studying this family group for a number of years. This still shot of Matilda was part of a probably multi-second video of her, and they've been accused of using a Chewbacca mask. It's purely coincidence that she happens to look like what we know as Chewbacca. But right after this was taken, she turned towards the people with the camera who are hiding in a blind, and they thought she saw them, and they put their heads and their cameras down. As soon as that happened, Matilda turned, walked away, squatted, and urinated. And had they been able to catch that on film, it would have been, again, far more proof of her being a genuine Sasquatch than just this still. There's online you can see a short sequence of frames of her as she turns her head from away towards the camera. But this is a genuine photograph of a juvenile female Sasquatch. Okay. Let me just see if I. Now, before I get to this, just go back to the other slide quickly, if you would. There were 3 key samples in this study that were from, the samples were of known Sasquatch hair, blood, or saliva. All 3 samples were, one was of a juvenile Sasquatch that was shot and killed by a hunter, which is another whole story, but I believe it really happened. And some tissue from that juvenile Sasquatch was part of the study. There was blood from the Kentucky habituation site where they had taken some tiny pieces of glass and glued them onto a plate, put some peanut butter sandwich, smeared it on the plate. When the Sasquatch licked the plate, it cut its tongue on the glass, and left a smear of blood on the plate. And the third sample was in the Hooper Reservation in California, where there were some garbage bags that contained feminine napkins. A Sasquatch came, they were inside an old rusty building. There was a hole in the building. The Sasquatch was observed reaching in to grab these bags, and in the process cut itself on the rusty edge of the hole, leaving hair and blood. Those three samples were the base samples. All three of those samples agreed with one another 100% as being Sasquatch. Other samples may or may not have agreed with those three, but those three, which came from different parts of the country as the baseline, all agreed with one another as being Sasquatch. Okay? So let's look quickly at, let's see. Oh, there was one slide before this one that for some reason the slide does not want to show. Let me just grab something off of this. So the study was widely criticized by scientists and by Sasquatch researchers alike. And the reason being, until this point, most probably Sasquatch researchers were of the impression that Sasquatch is North America's great ape. And therefore it's flesh and blood, it behaves like an ape, it thinks like an ape. The study showed that there was not an ape, that it is as much human as it is ape. It's actually a human hybrid. And if Sasquatch is a human hybrid, it's a game changer for everybody, for all the researchers. And so there were actually researchers who tried their best to discredit this study, discredit the authors of the study, because their whole careers up to that point, the books they had written, the documentaries they had created, were done on the basis of Sasquatch being some version of great ape. And if that were not true, they stood to lose reputation, money, everything. And so there was great opposition from within the Bigfoot community, but from the scientific community as well, who did not want to admit that this creature could exist. So this is just to show you a comparison with the largest great ape that we know, a mountain gorilla, silverback. The height of a gorilla is 5 or 6 feet if they stand up. They weigh 300 to 350 pounds. They're quadrupedal, meaning they generally walk on all fours. They can stand up, but they're uncomfortable standing up, much like a bear can stand up, but they don't walk like that. They are estimated to be 6 to 10 times as strong as a human. Gorillas can actually bend metal bars and escape from cages. That's their level of strength. And gorillas have been taught sign language to the point of having a 2,000 word sign language vocabulary, which is very significant. They are intelligent, but their intelligence is an ape level of intelligence. Sasquatch, on the other hand, is far larger, 7 to 10 feet or taller, 700 to 1,000 pounds. We've never been able to weigh a Sasquatch, obviously. So this is an estimate. I would guess that their strength is more like 50 times what a human could be. I've seen them do things with trees that defy the imagination, that even a gorilla could not accomplish because of the sheer brute strength that it would take. And as we're going to see in a moment, they have a very complex language ability that a gorilla does not possess. Okay. And this is our last slide before our pause, next pause. So if they are a human hybrid, I propose that they are, it would explain many of their behavioral and physical characteristics, including their higher intelligence that up to now have been considered human, uniquely human. So they're bipedal, they walk typically on 2 legs only, very high level of intelligence. They live in close-knit family groups where they seem to mate for life and have multiple offspring with one partner. They have a very complex language. They have other superhuman characteristics as well that we do not possess. Superhuman strength, shaman type abilities such as healing, mind reading, these types of things. They seem have the ability to appear and disappear seemingly at will. And the ability to cloak, meaning to disappear while remaining in the same location, just invisible. I think our next slide is a pause. I'm going to talk for a second before we go to the pause, just about cloaking, or in mind speak, which means words coming into people's minds that they did not generate, that are believed to come from Sasquatch. Now, I've seen things that I believe were cloaked in the woods, where I saw color and movement moving through the trees, tried to go head off what I thought were hikers, and there was no one there. There were no other people in the area, but I absolutely saw color and movement in the trees. One of the gals who used to be on my team here, like John, was up near Mount Evans, was out with her family, saw something in the distance, the near distance, that was a shimmer where she could see through it. If you've ever seen the movie Predator, it's that effect. That's what I'm talking about. And she was standing there wondering what that was. She could see a defined shape. But she could see through it. Her nephew was there. She called her nephew over and she said, "Do you see anything strange over here?" And she just kind of pointed without saying what it was. And he looked for a moment and he said, "Yeah, there's something going on next to that tree. What is that?" And as they spoke, the shape moved over to the side, stayed in the same shape, and was still invisible. At that point, they decided it was time to make a hasty departure from that area. But something was cloaked, something was there. It had a shape, but you could see through it, and we can't explain how it's possible. So we're going to take a pause for another moment.
Okay, this is getting very interesting. Shar, you had the last question unanswered. Do you want to get off your back there and ask your question?
I was taking a nap, just kidding. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I was just gonna say that I was up in Bailey about, I don't know, maybe, well, it was in the summer, and I had stopped at the Sasquatch Museum, and I was getting all fired up because I was staying at this, it was like a tiny cabin up in Bailey. It was like an Airbnb. And I didn't see Jim at the Sasquatch Museum that day, but his wife was there. And I attended an event he had last fall. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Anyways, so I went to go stay at this tiny house cabin for a weekend, or it was just for one of the nights. And, you know, I was thinking, I was like, well, I'm in Bailey, you know, something could happen where I might see a Bigfoot, or, you know, I'm right on the Pike National Forest. And I didn't see anything walking through the woods or anything like that, but I had gone to bed that night, and probably around midnight, I heard this like loud, it almost sounds like a loud rock being thrown, and it literally shook the whole cabin. So I don't know what it was, but I don't think anybody was out there just messing around or, you know, trying to pull a prank or anything like that. So I just wanted to tell you guys that story because I thought that was interesting. But I was pretty shooken up after that because I kept thinking, what if this thing comes in the cabin, or who knows, you know? So
Well,
yeah.
It's not uncommon for them to throw things at cabins or at people. I have a lot of stories up here of them slapping the side of a cabin where it shakes the whole
Wow.
cabin at night.
Mm-hmm.
And people tend to not do that. If you're not a Sasquatch and you do that, you risk being shot. Everyone up here has guns. And
Right.
you would be foolish to do that. But I've had things thrown at me in the woods very hard, hitting just behind me. So they do that. So it could have been a Sasquatch that threw a rock at your cabin.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
move on to the next one so we don't take too much time. Cedric, I see you're trying again. Can you go ahead and unmute yourself and see if you can get your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me. I think like last school year, I went on a Bigfoot trip specifically near Bailey. And then before that, we actually went to the Bailey cabin. It was actually a really fun time. But we went there and we were looking for Bigfoot sightings. And one night, the girls in group, apparently they heard wood knocking, like a little bit away, but they could still hear it. And yeah, that was kind of an experience, but we never actually saw him, but it was pretty cool.
They do knock. We're not sure if they use an instrument like a log or if they use their voice to make that sound, but they do make a sound that sounds to us like someone knocking on a tree.
Okay, let's move to the next question that came in. Is from Lori. I like your icon there.
Yeah, I'm coming all the way from Egypt. Hey, I was noticed when you told the story about Matilda squatting and urinating. I wonder if they collected, any the DNA from the urine.
I don't know. I don't know how much DNA you can get from urine, to be honest. I'm not versed in that, but I don't know the answer to that question if they did collect anything. I have some feces that I've sent in for analysis, a 48-inch turd, I call it the tremendous turd, that I found here near Bailey that I have sent in, but I have not gotten any analysis back yet. But I'm very curious to find out what that was. But urine, I've had friends who've had their tents urinated on by a Sasquatch at night. It sounded like a fire hose, but they didn't take any analysis. I don't think they even thought of it at the time, but good question.
And one last comment here from downstairs. Any information about government acknowledgement of the existence of Sasquatch?
Yes and no. We have a document from the Mount Hood National Forest Office, which you could see in our store. It is a Bigfoot sighting report that they have their wildland fire rangers fill out whenever they have an encounter. So they acknowledge that they exist. They acknowledge that their personnel are coming into contact with them, and they actually have a database where they're tracking those sightings. I know that for a fact. So if one national forest is doing that, there must be more offices that are doing it. And just as the government recently came forward with the information about UFOs that, oh, by the way, we've been studying these for decades. Yes, they exist. Yes, we believe in them. I believe something is going to come out of that nature regarding Sasquatch, maybe by the National Forest Service or Parks Board, but there will be a revelation simply because they cannot hide it forever. There's too many people that have encountered Sasquatch that the government sooner or later has to make an admittance that they've known about these forever and have never said anything to the public.
Jim, that sounds very much like the story that's given to us about UFOs.
Yes.
It's coming, but it's not here yet. So Stacy, Deb, we'll get you on the next pause so that we don't break up Jim's talk too much. So Kathy, if you go ahead and start the show again, and Jim can continue. Thank you.
Okay. So still talking about intelligence. Now, gifting is a way that we can get clues to their level of intelligence. And John Warren and I had some gifting sites for a number of years together. Gifting refers basically to a researcher taking finding a secret location that no one knows about. It would not be on a trail. It would be off the trail. Taking objects to see how Sasquatch will interact with those things. Typically, we would take, as you can see in this picture, we would take plastic horses, in this case, almonds, some deer tines, which are the sharp ends of deer antlers that are cut off, make a little figure or a little altar, if you would. We would take extensive photographs of that. Then we would come back later and see what had happened. And in this case, the horse was removed, the almonds were removed. They left a couple of the deer tines, but always there was clearly intelligent intent in what they would do. And you can go to the next one. Another example, we used a lot of toy horses, which they liked. Before we said a number of things, there's a pocket watch there, a carabiner, some Crayolas. They took everything, they rearranged the Crayolas, separated them. But many times when we would come back, we would find everything there. We assumed that nothing had been messed with, and then we would realize later that everything had been turned 90 degrees, but it was still there, or everything had been turned upside down and left. They always took the horses. If we left a dog, a toy dog, they would throw it on the ground next to the rock that we used. We did have some re-giftings back to us on one occasion. Like you can see on this little horse, we had a Playmobil cow that had an articulating neck. And we found a blue jay feather stuck in the neck, sticking up, that we had not put there. So they had actually put that feather there for us. So gifting and re-gifting, we actually attempted one time to get their fingerprints, because when we would leave jars of peanut butter out, they would open the jars, they would scoop their fingers in and take it out, or they would lick it. You could see a big tongue mark, and then the jar would be closed again, as opposed to a bear, which would just rip the jar apart to eat the peanut butter. The Sasquatch were quite careful about unscrewing and rescrewing the lid. So John and I took a jar, clean jar, sterilized it, used gloves, filled it with these little deer antlers, deer tines, which they loved. They took, over the few years we did this, they took about 100 items from us. So we put deer tines in the jar without a lid, turned the jar over, put it on the rock, piled rocks around it, piled a big rock on top of it to hold it there. We came back a few days later, and initially we thought nothing had changed. Then we realized the jar was empty and everything was exactly the way we had placed it. So they paid very careful attention to how we had placed the jar and the rocks. They did not leave any fingerprints on the jar. I don't know how they did it, but they took the jar, took the deer tines, put it back, put everything back the way we had it, as though they could fool us, I think, that they'd even been there. Go to the next picture. This was an interesting, this was a different, we had these rocks on the left-hand side that we just set out there. We came back and they were rearranged, as you see on the right. Now that takes some intelligence. That's not something that a raccoon would do, or a bear. To rearrange these rocks in the form of almost a necklace without a string, we thought was fascinating. And so they took the rocks we had, they just rearranged them in their fashion. Now, John had an encounter one day by himself. Everything seems to happen when we're by ourselves. He was going from one gifting site, which was up the side of the mountain, to another gifting site, which typically we would have walked down to a trail, along the trail, up another trail to the other gifting site. It was farther than just crossing through the woods but it was faster because you had to go around trees and through gullies. On this day, John decided to just go cross country. It was on a Saturday, middle of the day. As he's walking through the woods, he heard a bark behind him, just bark. And he looked around and he didn't see a dog anywhere. And he thought, that's strange. I haven't seen any dogs, but he didn't see anything. He rejoined the trail and began walking up the trail to our second site. And he heard the same thing behind him, bark. And he turned around, and there, 60 yards back in the middle of the trail, he thought was a burnt tree stump, but there is no burnt tree stump in the trail there. And as he stood looking at it, wondering what it was, after about 2 seconds, it turned and went into the woods. Initially, he called me from there because we have telephone reception often. He said, hey, I just saw a hiker near our gifting site. I said, really? He said, yeah, they were dressed in all black with a black backpack and they hid from me. And I thought, that's a strange way for a hiker to behave. And I said, that doesn't sound like a hiker, John. Why would they do that? And the more he thought about it, and he sat there for 30 minutes and the figure never came back out of the woods. We tried to reenact it. I went out there with him. I stood where we think the Sasquatch was. I turned and went into the woods, and every time he would say, go faster, go faster. And I couldn't go fast enough to imitate this Sasquatch. And as soon as I would get in the woods, he could see me in the trees for quite a distance, my hat, my backpack. When that Sasquatch went in the woods, it entered the trees and was gone, just disappeared. He couldn't see it anymore. And so the more he thought about it, the more he realized that his brain told him it was a hiker because his brain was trying to find something rational, logical, whereas it was a Sasquatch and it wanted him to see it. It made a noise so that he would turn around and look at it. Otherwise, he would have gone up the trail and never known it was there. And that happens all the time. If you see a Sasquatch, I'm convinced it's because they wanted you to see them. That's the only reason. Okay? Next slide. This should have been a video. We had them bring gifts back to us 2 years after the fact. This horse you can see there, it was a bust of a horse made out of wood. And there was a plastic horse as well that were just down the hillside from our gifting area. And we found them 2 years after we'd put them out there, that they brought them back, placed them where we could see them. A normal animal would not do that. So things that we found with gifting was they would re-gift things to us. We found if we kept a routine, always went in the same way, we would talk to them out loud. We would thank them for letting us come into the woods. And they would communicate back to us by throwing things at us, throwing green pine cones, knocking, barking, as John had happen. I had the same bark happen 2 weeks later at 1 a.m. I was coming out with a friend and heard the exact same bark behind me on the trail. I knew it had to be the same Sasquatch. We've heard them howling. We've heard them whistle. I've been out there at midnight with a group whistling a tune. When I would pause, the same tune came back at me from back in the darkness from the trees. So, and everyone heard it. So it wasn't like it was my imagination. So they have many ways to communicate with us should they choose to do that. Okay. Another pause after talking about gifting. Any thoughts, questions? Hi, Paula. I hadn't seen you yet. Nice to see you.
Okay, so I think the first one that had her hand up was Stacy. Do you still have a question?
I do. Some researchers, not all, feel that there are different groups of Bigfoot that are positive and that there are some groups of them that are not what we would call positive beings, that they would be dangerous if you did come across them. I understand that they're, don't always like you in their territory, but I'm talking about that you would be in danger if you're around them. What are your thoughts on that?
Great question. They certainly can be dangerous when you think of their size and strength compared to ours. Not to mention the fact that they can appear and disappear. So as to whether they are dangerous by clan, I do believe that Sasquatch have all the genetic diversity that we do. And just as you have people that become serial killers, murderers, versus the majority of us who would never consider doing something like that ever, I believe there are Sasquatch that go rogue, if I could use that term, that become aggressive, that can harm and probably do harm people. I think often that happens because of provocation. I know of some cases where a young Sasquatch was captured and was being held, and during the night, an adult came to release it and injured some humans that were there. There is another side, though. There are other researchers who would say, no, Sasquatch, as we know them, Sasquatch is one species, and they are gentle and compassionate. There are other creatures, they would say, that are not Sasquatch, that are ferocious or violent. Dogman is one of these creatures. I believe that they exist. They've been seen almost as many times as Sasquatch. They look like an upright canine, upright ears, long snout, hands like claws, but they leave tracks like an enormous dog. And they tend to be violent far more often than Sasquatch. So I think there's other creatures out there, if you have that much of an open mind, that probably are violent. I've heard, now I've said to myself, I'm in the process of doing research to write a book. I think I'm finally going to write a book on the two sides of Sasquatch, if it is in fact Sasquatch, the compassionate healer, shaman, playful side versus the violent, murderous, cannibalistic side. Are they Sasquatch? When does Sasquatch become violent, if they do? So I'm trying to gather as much evidence as I can to try and answer your question. So all I can say is I've never been hurt. No researcher that I know of has ever been hurt. If someone I know disappears or is attacked, I would have to give serious consideration as to whether I would keep on doing this or not.
Okay, thanks
Thank
for
you,
that.
Jim.
Deb, do you still have a question?
Yeah. Well, I was curious, this is sort of the last one on the language, that thinking back to Jane Goodall with her, primate research, I got the impression that they were quite intelligent, and I wasn't sure how could you speak more on that, on why, like this community in Kentucky, we're working with them, and what did they find? Were they researchers like Jane Goodall, or could you speak to their, why you think there's so much communication is so much more complex than the other primates?
We're going to hit that next. I will just say before we move to that section, which is next on our list, is their vocabulary and their vocalizations are extremely varied. Anything from conversation like we're having, which I've heard numerous times, to more animalistic, for lack of a better term, sounds like growling, howling, roaring, screaming, whistling, whooping, imitating other creatures, imitating people. They can they're such great mimics that I know of people who have had them families who live in a habituation area, the mother would hear the children calling her name from the forest when the children were in the house, and she thought it was her children. It was so exactly like, or the children hearing the mother's voice in the forest. They are that clever, that skilled of mimics, imitating coyotes, birds, any animal that's out there. But I wanted you to hear some of their vocalizations, so that's where we're headed next.
Yeah, I have a question before.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, listen, I hope everybody comes to see you, though. Your center is absolutely amazing. So I hope you give the address, because I've been there and you've done an excellent tour, and we're gonna happy to have you in Laughlin. But you mentioned the government a while back, and you said something like the government needs to acknowledge. Do you really believe it's necessary for disclosure to come from the government about this? And if you do, what do you think will happen to the Bigfoot?
Well, I think people will only believe it if the government says it. There's encyclopedias of evidence out there, like what I'm showing you, that people still don't believe it. They'll come through my museum, they'll walk through and they'll say, nah, I don't think so. So for some reason, people put store in what the government says, or if a civilian were to find a dead Sasquatch or kill a Sasquatch, I've often said with my researcher friends, if any of us ever happens on the body of a Sasquatch, we're going to keep a secret as long as we possibly can to do our own research with our own scientists before the government can get their hands on it. So
I agree with you 100%, because
early on in Sasquatch research, I'm saying 20, 30 years ago, there seemed to be more cases. I was just talking with someone today, Scott Carpenter, for those who know who he is, about they would get visits from men in black, for lack of a better term, guys who would come from some government agency talking to them about what they were doing and they should stop doing it. But I haven't heard about anything like that for a long time. It certainly never happened to me that I'm aware of, nor any other researchers I know. But it wouldn't surprise me to have a government agent coming and checking out, seeing what we're doing, wanting to know, how much influence we're having over people's thinking on this topic. So
I don't think he would identify himself.
Probably
He would come and dress in jeans and a t-shirt, and he'd fight. I think they could be doing that even now.
Well, I've had people come in with notebooks saying they just want to see the museum. They didn't even look at the store. They went straight into the museum, were there for an hour at least, came out, never said anything to me and left. And I've had that happen a couple of times that made me wonder what was their purpose in coming in.
And we've gone beyond our 5 minutes, Jim, so that you can maintain momentum. I'm going to save Melody until the next break. Thank you.
Okay. So let's get on to language ability. So there's going to be a sound here that was recorded here in Colorado. Oh, I just talked about the diversity of their language. Now the recordings that we're going to play, I thought there was one from Colorado first. I guess there's not. But these were done in the 70s in the Sierra Nevada mountains by a man named Ron Moorhead. Now Ron was a hunter at the time, and he had a group of men that he would hunt with, and they would go by horseback 8 hours ride into the Sierra Nevadas to a secret location. And they would stay there a week or two. While they were there, almost from the first time they went, at night, these creatures would come to their camp, would mess with the campsite, and would vocalize. In the early years, the vocalizations were quite aggressive, trying to get these guys to leave. But as they realized that the men posed no threat to them, they began to vocalize more in a way to draw something out of the men. So they would try and get the men to respond to them. So I think that may be the next slide, unless it's the Colorado Howler. No, this is California.
In for Nightville.
They would knock. You hear the men's voices in the background.
You should talk this.
So you can tell they were, it's in their whooping, they sounded like something from the great ape enclosure at the zoo. But then they would start to talk and they would try to draw the men out. So it would go, whoa. And if the men didn't respond, they would do it again. When Ron would answer, then the Sasquatch would go off on this long tirade, and they identified numerous individuals that repeatedly came back. There was the old man Sasquatch who you heard at the beginning there. There was a female. They had more than one youngster who would communicate with them. So you'll hear the men, then you'll hear the Sasquatch responding to that. So I don't know if you can pick up where we left off or not. You may have to scrub forward a little bit or back. Maybe if you click on the timeline there, it'll just take you straight to that spot.
That's our job. Now we know where we look for tracks of owner for sure.
So most of those vocalizations were the old man. This was done on a reel-to-reel recorder with a microphone sitting out further outside the lean-to where they were taking refuge. They had it analyzed. They had these recordings analyzed by experts in Los Angeles who determined that the range, the decibel range that these Sasquatch were able to do were impossible for humans to reproduce. And they could even tell, I don't know how sound experts do this, from the volume, from the, just from those vocalizations, that they were far larger than a human. And but you can tell it sounds like a person talking in a way. And I've heard this on numerous occasions. Let's see, a year ago, May, I was in up near Steamboat Springs. We were camping. We'd had a lot of activity around the camp that weekend. They had come in, were pushing on the tent from outside. I was too chicken to push back against their hand. I didn't know what they would do, but they left tracks around the tent. And the morning we were going to break camp, so we were all sitting around having breakfast. Weren't thinking about Sasquatch particularly because it was morning and we were about to leave. And while we were having breakfast, suddenly just out of where we could see over a little rise, we heard two voices. It sounded like a male and a female voice, talk, 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 and then a scream. And of course, we're all eating. It's like, you stop in mid, it's like, did you hear that? And of course, we didn't have any recorders going at the time because we were breaking camp. And then again, talk, 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 louder, and then a louder scream. And so I took my recorder and I went and I hung it in a tree closer to where the sounds were coming from. And we went about breaking camp. I listened to the recording later. The sounds are too faint for me to play here, otherwise I would have put it up there. But we heard at least 10 tree knocks on the recorder that we couldn't hear with our ears. We heard a male voice that yelled what sounded like Luther, like the name Luther, way off in the distance. We heard a female voice and we heard a child's voice. There were no children in our camp. We had no kids with us. And we heard a bizarre laugh at the beginning that was no one in our camp. So they were continuing to vocalize, knock while we were breaking camp. They had just moved a little ways away where the recorder picked it up, but we couldn't hear it. But they vocalize all the time. People often confuse them with coyotes, confuse it with thinking there's other hikers out there when there actually aren't any hikers. So it sounds very much like people talking, but you just cannot understand the words. So carry on, I think. So there's other aspects to Sasquatch that I can only describe as paranormal or the woo aspect of their being interdimensional, appear and disappear at will. I know of two people I know personally, and a third that's a secondhand story of watching Sasquatch disappear literally in front of their eyes. They were there and they were gone. And I have no reason to doubt these people. I believe they are honest, but they have actually seen them disappear. We've talked about cloaking. I know of two people, and I know personally two people who were healed or with someone who was healed, they believe by a Sasquatch. I know of other stories, multiple stories of people saying that a Sasquatch healed them. Next one, this mind speak we mentioned. I think there was another, and eye shine. Now this is what we're going to get into the last here. Sasquatch seems to have an ability, I cannot explain it, to generate light from within, shining out. I've seen it on 3 occasions that I'm aware of. I have videoed it once, which I'm going to show you, but all of our lights were off. We were sitting in the pitch black. We had night vision goggles. We could see lights with our naked eye. And when you put up a normal pair of binoculars, you could pick out 2 each time. There were 2 lights, 2 eyes. Some were farther apart than others. Some were higher than others. And they moved. As we watched, they would move around. But these were not reflecting anything. They were generating from within. They changed color and they changed intensity while we watched. So we'll see if this video can play. Now, let me explain this video. This was, oh, sorry, this is back. I don't know how this got stuck in here. This was another vocalization. Go ahead and hit that. was here in Colorado. Sounds very mournful. I think there's one more. Yeah, you can stop it. There you go. So this was just a single Sasquatch. Whether it was sad, whether it was looking for another Sasquatch, it didn't to me, it didn't sound like any other animal I've ever heard. It was not a coyote. It's not a wolf. When wolves and coyotes howl, they're always joined by other wolves and coyotes who respond to them. So, plus this vocalization was echoing for, it seemed, miles. But let's go on to this video. Now, this was taken. The reason this is hard to see is I was holding a night camera up to my phone lens and trying to get them lined up right, so it moves around a bit, but the green hue is from the night vision scope. Okay. And every light you see in this was, whoops, technical difficulty.
I will have to show it off of.
Yeah, this is the video here, Jim, where she's got to go to the YouTube spot.
All right.
Yeah, one moment. It's queued up. It's just not on. One moment.
But you'll see amidst the green hue a light that looks like flashlights. But if you took binoculars and looked through them, each of those lights was two eyes. It's just that the night vision scope only saw it as one light. But you'll see how many there were that night. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One particularly bright set. Two more. I counted, I think, 15 that night that were watching us. So I would take the night vision scope down, put my binoculars up, and see two eyes each time. Okay, you can stop it. So that was the first time I'd actually seen that. I'd heard about it. The first night that I saw it, I wasn't looking for eye shine. I was just out with a couple in an area I'd not been to before. We climbed up a hill. We sat down in the dark with our lights off. I began to see a pinprick of light through the bushes, and I thought I was imagining things. And at night, we see better with the periphery of our eyes than we do with the center of our eyes. So I kept trying to look sideways to see if I was seeing it, but eventually I could see it with my naked eye. when I put my night vision scope up, it just was like blasted light at me. And there were very often two or more gathered together. I think the next slide shows some of those images from that very first night, where I actually took some pictures from my night scope. Yeah. So here were two and two, but they're very close together. And then sometimes there would be one bright shine. The next photo that looked like several almost gathered together. I can't explain it, but again, I only saw this through the night vision camera. Otherwise, I was just seeing tiny pinpricks of light. So fascinating aspect of Sasquatch that I cannot explain, and that no other animal that I'm aware of, no other mammal, I should say, has the ability to do. Okay, and I think after this pause, I have two videos. If we have time, it's up to you. They're not part of the presentation, but we'll go to questions now.
Okay, Jim, I'm going to ask one question myself here right now, and that is, when I visited you, you seemed to be quite objective about all the data, and trying to not draw any undue conclusions. And yet you've been explaining to us things about Sasquatch emotions, awareness, mating for life, other things that would be hard to know. How do you ascribe your conclusion here, and how do you know you're not anthropomorphizing what you expect to see?
Good question. And that's always a risk. Much of the fact that they live in clans, family groups, has been verified by many researchers that could identify individuals over the years, or in some cases where they watch them grow up and then find a mate, and then watch those that couple have offspring, and neither the male nor the female ever apparently sought out any other mates than that one. So it's purely from research by other researchers, and typically in habituation situations where you have a high likelihood of seeing the same Sasquatch over many years, and they do live at least as long as we live. But in one case in Tennessee, they were with this family group long enough to see the original male who started as a youngster grow old and get completely gray, because he was in his 70s or 80s. And so the emotions is more just from observation of them demonstrating frustration or anger by throwing things at us. Their vocalizations that sometimes sound aggressive, sometimes sound inquisitive, or just curious, or trying to just get our attention. But to some degree, I probably am anthropomorphizing, interpreting what we're hearing and seeing in the only frame that I have, which is human. But they seem to behave enough like we do, particularly in their communication, that they speak a language to one another, obviously understand what the other ones are saying. The words sound like human words. In fact, Scott Nelson, who's a retired Navy cryptolinguist, took those recordings that we heard from the Sierra Nevadas, analyzed 90 minutes worth of them, and determined that it is a language. It has structure and syntax. He even came up with his version of the Sasquatch phonetic alphabet from those recordings.
Wow, cool.
So I'm not a linguist, but a professional linguist analyzed it, and that's what he determined.
Thank you for that answer. For those that came in late, we're going down to the reactions part to hold your hand up using Zoom. I see Suzanne, you're holding your hand up physically. We've got 4 ahead of you. So Melody, you've been waiting. If you'd like to unmute and go ahead and ask Jim your question.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
It's not so much a question as a comment. I've known Jim and Daphne for a long time, and I'm a backpacker. And I used to be a skeptic, and I decided I'm no longer a skeptic. I took my sister, who is very much a skeptic, southwest of Bailey to backpack. And we were at least 20 miles in off of 285. And we were in a very primitive area. Went to sleep. There were about 4 other tents, maybe all around this big knoll. However, about 2 o'clock, I was awakened, and I remember waking up and going, why would somebody be chopping wood at this time of the night? And I kept hearing this knocking, and I realized it wasn't somebody chopping wood. It sounded like somebody knocking on a tree, but there was nowhere they could have been around me. It was coming from the mountains surrounding this knoll. And I'm a neurologic music therapist, so rhythm is real important to me. I was trying to figure out how this sequence was going. And I thought, well, I don't get it. There's no way anybody could be up there chopping wood. And I tried to figure it out, and it repeated a couple sequences, but mostly it kept changing. And this went on for about 20 minutes, and all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, this is probably one of Jim's tree knocking things. And then I didn't wake up my sister because I thought, she's not going to believe it. So we're sitting around the campfire in the morning having our coffee, and she kind of goes, did you notice anything strange last night? And I said, well, what are you talking about? And she explained the same thing, and we got all excited. We went back to the Sasquatch outpost to their map. And sure enough, there were 4 or 5 pins in that map in that area of tree knocking.
That's, Melody, that's really interesting. Can we hold the questions now, not stories, until the end, so we can get the questions that need clarification, and then we'll go ahead and carry the conversation of anybody later at the end. So Susan, our next in line. Angie, I see that you're trying to get in. You've got 2 ahead of you.
Oh, I want to ask a question about communications. What you said about communications, I think it's very fascinating, especially what you mentioned about mind speak. For clarification, could you give us 1 or 2 examples of the type of message that is communicated through mind speak?
I can, not from personal experience because I've never had it happen. I think there's certain types of people, I would call them sensitives, who are more able to hear these voices, but I have a number of friends who have had them speak to them and give them their name in English, tell them in English. One friend was driving up Guanella Pass at night. He said a thought came into his mind that something said to him, I'm out here, I'm in the trees. If you will stop and come into the trees, I'll show myself to you. And my friend said, I don't think so, because I don't want you to eat me. But that thought just came out of the blue. And there was more than one, there was a dialogue going on between them. I've heard other people, as they inquire from the Sasquatch in their mind, have had them answer questions like, why don't you show yourself to us more? And the answer is, you're not ready for that, or we need to teach you more before you can accept what we would show you. So, yeah, I would say women more than men tend to hear. by and large, in my experience. So just an observation.
Thank you. Very
Okay,
helpful.
let's,
Thank you.
we've exceeded the 5 minutes. Bottom B, you're next up after the next pause, and then Suzanne, and then Angie. So Jim, go ahead and continue now.
Okay. So I have two videos that are, one you've probably seen, this one you may not have. This is one of my favorite sighting videos, and I'm just going to let it play, and then we'll talk about it. These are two hunters in Idaho.
So we're 4.6 from the truck, and that's the closest road. I'm coming down here, I'm beat, get my gear off, get ready to eat. All of a sudden Eric's like, oh my gosh, big bear, big bear. I grab my bow, I raise up, I look down the hill, and it is the freaking tallest bear walking on two legs I've ever seen.
Give me the camera. When I got up and I caught that little glimpse right down there in that canyon, I could see him running, and that was running. It had to have been running at least 2 to 3 times faster than I can run, and I can run fast, but I've never seen anything run that fast in my life.
Freaking awesome.
That's awesome. So who knows? Maybe we'll get another shot at it.
Yeah. Tim, big bear. Yeah, big bear.
I don't know what it was. I really don't.
All right.
Give me the camera. Give me the camera.
This thing was at least 8 feet tall from where he was standing. And he had been watching them for some time before they noticed, I believe. He or she. I don't know if it was a male or female. And this next video is the Patterson Gimlin video. And the reason I'm showing it is it's been stabilized so that you can watch her walk. I'll let that play, and then I'll explain some things. Be one more slide, just of a still shot. So this is the best known shot of Patty, as we call her. She had breasts. The breasts bounced as she walked. Of course. Her leg to arm length ratio, and ours, our legs are 20% longer. In Patty, her legs were 5% longer than her arms. She was 7 feet 6 inches tall, based on structures that are still in the area today. The depths of her tracks in the sand compared to humans indicated she weighed approximately 900 pounds. You can see her musculature, you can see tendons, you can see in the back of her forward facing leg, the tendon that comes down the side. You can see her calf muscle down below. She has an actual injury on that hip. She had a hematoma of some kind on her right hip that stayed there as she walked. Her stride cannot be imitated by humans. Many have claimed to have been in a suit when they filmed this. One, you'd have to have a suit that was 7 feet 6 inches tall. You would have to have arm extensions, leg extensions, And the way Sasquatch typically walk, as seen in this video, we call it the compliance stride, and humans simply cannot imitate it. We don't walk the same way. And so, is there another number there? Morton Hack was Academy Award nominee in 1968 for Planet of the Apes costumes. He said he could not have built a suit in any way close to what that would have had to have been. So in 1967, there simply was not technology to build a suit that could do what this creature did. And so I show that because there's been a lot of controversy about this video. I believe it's 100% genuine. I believe the guys who took it were genuine. They've never changed their story in 50 years, 60 years, in spite of rumors that one of them on his deathbed recanted he did not. Bob Gimlin still travels around the country, speaks at conferences, still tells the same story. So he's never changed his story. So I just thought I'd put that in there for those who had seen that video to get some more explanation about it. So that's it for the presentation. So we can go to questions or comments.
Okay, so we're almost 2 hours into this. We have about 35 minutes left if we want to stay. And button B is the next one. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask Jim your comment.
I'm going to disappear in the woods.
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I've been waiting over a year for your presentation, so thank you.
You're welcome.
My question is dealing with the video that was on YouTube, I saw that there was a lot of, different green sparks around the area. Do you know what that phenomenon was, or?
That was just anomalies in the air, I think. It was the bright lights that were the eyes.
Mm-hmm. And just an energetic piece of that, it could be other anomalies like things that we can't see that you were picking up with the camera. And I'm not quite sure how you would decipher that or not, but it was just a thought.
Everything's possible. When I'm looking through my binoculars, I could only see the lights. I couldn't see anything in the air around it. So it's possible. I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility.
And one more question. The Sasquatch in Native American tradition is almost like a watcher over the forest, a protector. Do you feel like that is like a certain type of vibe that you get from them when you're around them, or?
I do think they protect us. Native Americans also talk about their women and children being taken by Sasquatch. So it wasn't always just a protective measure. They did have a dark side to them. Again, if that was Sasquatch that did those things. I do have stories told by Native Americans and now published in books where they recounted being physically present when their child was snatched by Sasquatch and was killed. And so that's what I say. There's so much about them we don't understand. I would certainly love to understand why they would go between this wonderful, compassionate healer to such a violent creature, and what causes that shift is what I'm trying to figure out.
Maybe it's just because they can't be human also, or have human thoughts like that. I don't know.
Well, we're going to move on to the next person and then come back if you have more to say. So the next one is Suzanne.
Okay, first, Jim, thank you so much. That was so enlightening and so intriguing. Excellent. I have a number of questions, but I'll just do a few unless we've got time. These are really big beings, 6 feet, 900, 1,000 pounds. Is there any information you can give us as to what they eat to maintain that energy?
Yes, they are omnivores like us. They seem to frequent berry patches, so they eat whatever fruit they can find. They also eat meat. They have many times been observed or had the remains left of deer or elk that they killed. I found a spot a few years ago that I believe was a site where a Sasquatch killed an elk. I found tracks running in the snow from the elk. It was running, trying to escape. The Sasquatch tracks were converging on it. The Sasquatch tracks were 10 to 12 feet apart with each stride. So it was enormous and it was running. They converged on a spot where there was an imprint of the elk's body in the snow, perfect imprint, and that there were no elk tracks leaving that spot. There was no blood, there was no hair, there were no drag marks, and there was no body. So obviously the Sasquatch tracks continued beyond there. It must have simply picked that elk up and walked away, which is at least 500 pounds dead weight. But that elk never got up from that spot. It did not leave there on its own power. So I don't know how it knocked it down, but it was as though it hit a brick wall and dropped dead in the snow and didn't move. So that was quite a find.
Wow.
Let's go on now to Angie, who has got some, don't forget on mute.
I
There we go.
wasn't done.
To be fair to everybody, Suzanne, we're going to rotate.
Okay.
And we got 3 more ahead of you, and I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
I actually just have a comment for you. You had talked about the Sasquatch potentially being a human hybrid. I think the Sasquatch might think humans are Sasquatch hybrid.
They may very well. Good point.
That was all.
Okay, Jamila.
You might be pronouncing it wrong.
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry I don't have a camera. I was just wondering, why do you think we haven't found bodies or bones or remains or graveyards of Sasquatch?
Well, one, you're assuming we haven't. I don't think that's true. I think we have. I think it's in different cases, different reasons why that was not made public. I know of stories of Native Americans having killed Sasquatch and disposing of the remains because they didn't want that information to get out. The man who shot the juvenile, as rumor has it, may still have the body, but he expressed a fear of letting that be known because of being held liable for manslaughter because it was so human-like. He did not want to be brought before a court of law for killing that. So, but the other side of that question would be, if they are able to move in and out of our dimension, then perhaps they die somewhere else. They don't die in this dimension. I don't really have another good answer until we find a body.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Thank you very much. I saw Regina, you were waving your hand, so go ahead. And
Well, actually, what happened is that I was going to ask the question about what do they eat?
all right. If you have any more, come on back. Columbine 2 next up.
Unmute.
You mentioned healings. How do those happen?
So I will tell you about the one I know the most about was a woman who, there were 5 or 6 women who went on a Sasquatch outing together, camping, just women, there were no men there. One of the women was dying of cirrhosis of the liver. Her abdomen was completely distended and hard because she was in terminal stages of cirrhosis. And she knew it and her friends knew it. And they invited her to come with them in spite of her level of discomfort, just so that she could be with people. And so she came and they set up they had a big outfitter tent with cots on the inside, so the women were kind of all supposed to sleep around the edges of the outfitter tent. This particular woman, as they got ready to go to bed, went over to the side under a couple of trees to urinate before she went to bed. When she got up, one of the trees was no longer there, in her words. So it must have been a Sasquatch standing there. In hindsight, as the women talked, they wondered whether the Sasquatch became aware of a problem by smelling her urine, that she was ill. They went to bed. This woman never slept very well at home, let alone on a cot in the woods. So she was struggling to sleep. She heard something outside the tent, approach the tent walking. It came, stood over where she was lying on the outside of the tent, and she heard this rhythmic tapping, tap, 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 on top of the tent. Then it moved over the next woman. It seemed to know where the women were. It went around like that with every woman in the tent tapping this rhythm, and it came back to her and stayed over her. And it tapped for quite a while. And finally, she was afraid. She didn't know what it was. She said, "Please go away. You're frightening me." And the tapping stopped, and she heard it move away. The next morning, the other women got up, including my friend who told me this story. They went out, made breakfast, because they knew that she would take a while to get up, and their plan was make breakfast, go back in and help her get up and get dressed. Before they could go back in, they heard her screaming and crying inside the tent, and they all rushed in to see, and she came running out with her hands in the air, weeping profusely, saying, "I'm healed, I'm healed." Her stomach was completely flat, soft to the touch. She said, "A Bigfoot healed me in the night." And, these other women are all just standing there in disbelief. And she couldn't stop sobbing. And they went around the outside of the tent and they found two hollow reeds, like cattail reeds. And one of the women tapped them together, and she said, "That's what I heard last night, that tapping." They were going to go on a hike that day, and obviously she was going to be staying back. She said, "No, I'm going to go." And they said, "Are you sure?" And she goes, "Trust me, I'm fine, I'm healed." She went on the hikes. She had a routine appointment with her doctor like a month later. She went into the appointment. As she walked in the office, everyone stopped what they're doing and stared at her as she walked by, because they all assumed they would never see her alive again. Her doctor did a panel of tests. Her doctor was a woman. She came in and she said, "Well, you have no cirrhosis of the liver. Your liver count is normal. Your blood count is normal. Everything is normal." She said, "If you tell me a Bigfoot healed you, I have no other explanation for the fact that you are completely healed. And so I believe you." And that was almost 6 years ago. She's never had a recurrence, and she's been totally fine since then.
Okay, Joe, you're up next, then Cedric, then Suzanne. Joe.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I was just wondering if you did any studies that correlated with the ancient studies of what they called the giants, where you were talking about the Native American Indians and losing their children and that was a common story with them. It's probably a stretch, but I was just wondering if there was any work done in that area.
Well, there does seem to be a lot of evidence that there were giants. In some cases, there seems to be evidence that they're still around, but they seem to be a different creature than Sasquatch. The giants, from what I've heard and read, more resemble gigantic humans, not completely hairy like a Sasquatch would be, but could there be a correlation between them? I think it's possible. I do not believe personally that Sasquatch is a descendant of Gigantopithecus, which was an extinct giant ape. Many people want to say that. I believe Sasquatch is too human to be a descendant of simply a giant ape. And so they would be more like a gorilla in that case, and they're not. So I can't say much about giants. I am fascinated by reading stories about them, even current stories of giants being found in Afghanistan. But yeah, that's a little bit out of my realm, but still fascinating to me.
Thank you.
So Cedric, if you can unmute and speak louder and closer to your screen, if you could.
Okay. So, I actually have a question, but
Still can't quite hear you.
okay.
There you
So hear me better? Okay. So has Bigfoot ever been known to actually make things out of wood, like tools?
Great question. I have heard some stories. I don't have any firsthand experience, but I have, they make shelters out of wood that they build around a dead tree or something. But as far as a tool or anything, no, I've not heard of that, but they are so intelligent, I believe they could. I just have never known of anyone who found anything that apparently was made by a Sasquatch.
Because I found something on the camping trip that I went on that it was like a wooden mallet, and it was like carved in a weird way. Almost looks like unman-made.
Well, we like making sticks when we're out, so who knows if it was a Sasquatch or a human, but great question. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Okay, thank you. And we're moving to Suzanne now.
Okay, I was going to ask about artifacts. So apparently you have never found any artifacts. Is that correct?
Nothing that I could attribute to Sasquatch. I know other people who found artifacts, but no, I have not found anything today.
Okay. Two other quick points.
Can we come back to you? We got people in line still.
Okay,
Wayne.
I didn't know.
Yeah. We have Wayne and then November.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Jim, what's your personal view on using trail cams in the field?
I've tried them. There's probably 500,000 trail cams out in this country. And the fact that virtually no one has ever got an image of Sasquatch, I believe they are intelligent to the level of understanding what a camera is, which means they don't walk in front of them. I know that they have knocked them off of trees, stomped them into smithereens, turned them around to another side of the tree so that where they were heading, you couldn't see. There's very, very little film evidence from game cameras. Now, the exception would be, I've heard of some people who will put a camera inside their truck pointing out, and they have occasionally caught glimpses of something, but you have to be extremely smart. Whereas if I put an audio recorder out, which has little red lights on it, they don't seem to care. They'll walk around it, they'll vocalize around it, they'll mess with it. But cameras, they just seem to know enough. Either they avoid the camera altogether, or you'll find 15 frames that are completely whited out and then goes back to normal again, as though they just stuck their hand in front of it. I don't know, but I believe they're that smart. And we found at gifting sites, when we put cameras out, and John and I can attest to this, they stop coming to the site. They just simply won't come when there's a camera on location.
Okay, Navenka, if you want to unmute, and then Suzanne after that.
Can you hear me?
I can.
I've heard that Sasquatch can also write. I visited the website of Joan Ocean. Probably you know her. She's mainly known for her research of dolphins, for studying dolphins, but also the Sasquatch. And she says that when she leaves a gift for them in the evening, for example, a fruit or something, in the morning she often finds, for example, a beautiful stone or something with a note. And once, as she is known as Water Woman also, she found written on that stone, for water woman.
Hmm.
English language.
That's interesting. I've heard of many cases of them leaving gifts. We've had that experience. I've never heard till this story of them leaving writing. I will say that anytime we're doing a gifting site, we try very hard to make sure it's a site that no one knows about, because if humans, this is known these days. I mean, people know about Sasquatch, they know about gifting. If a human were to happen upon a site, I could totally see someone deciding, I'm just going to mess with this person and I'm going to play with these things. And so the writing, I don't know. I don't put it beyond Sasquatch to be able to write, but it would seem like we would find more evidence of them writing if they did that, typically. But I certainly can't deny it. I don't know.
Yes, it is on her website, John Ocean like the sea. Mainly about the dolphins, but there is also a section on Sasquatch. And there are numerous examples of writings.
We've tried leaving paper with Crayolas, and we would draw pictures on it in hopes that Sasquatch would do something on their own. They never did, in our experience.
Okay. Then there is somebody
Samantha,
following
for
her.
that. Thank you for that comment about Joan Ocean. I followed her as well. Okay, Suzanne.
Just one more for me. You've suggested that these creatures telepathically communicate, and that's sort of questionable, but also intriguing. But you've also mentioned that linguists have taken a look at what they consider to be a language. So you didn't say anything about translations. Has there been any translations of messages or sentences or anything like that?
No, just because for translation to happen, you would have to be in enough proximity to them to watch them over time. Now, there is one exception. Watch them over time so that you could determine when they say these words and do these things, that's what that word must mean. But there is the exception. There's a story of a family in Tennessee who had an habituation with a family of Sasquatch for 50 years. You can find it on YouTube. It's actually called 50 Years with Sasquatch. The book is out of print, but on YouTube, there's a series of narrations of the book. But the grandfather who originally partially raised this young Sasquatch that grew into an adult, according to the story, and I can only go by what they said, learned to communicate with Fox, is the name he gave this Sasquatch. At a rudimentary level, they could talk, and the granddaughter would write. She would hear them say words, she would phonetically write them down, and then ask her grandfather what they meant. And in her YouTube series, they actually show pages of this mini dictionary of hers where she had the word that she wrote and what her grandfather said he believed the meaning was. It's the only time I've known of anyone who attempted to do a word for word meaning based on their experience with the Sasquatch.
Do you remember what it was, or can you give us a clue?
No, I don't. She had quite a few words written down. So I need to look it up again, because I'd like to try using some of those words when I go out to see if I get any response.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Jim, and everybody here, we've got about 15 more minutes if we want to continue. Just in case people start leaving, I just want to say that BoulderExo, our group, is planning another presentation for February the 26th. It will be with Krista Alexander, who will present her detailed video analyses of unidentified aerial phenomena. That will begin at 6 p.m. on the 26th. So mark your calendars now. And we have 2 more speakers coming on beyond that in March and April. This has turned out to be pretty successful here. We got, I think, 46 people as far as I saw. And I want to thank everybody for investing in this. We just about break even when we pay Kathy and our speaker. And just know that Kathy does this for a living every day if you have needs like this. And just know also that Jim's outpost, his website is sasquatchoutpost.com. So now with that, I won't quite close yet. Let's go ahead and have more dialogue if we want. I don't see anybody with their hands up right now. So Suzanne, you got more questions?
Just a brief announcement for those who are interested in trying out outings. We're doing a Bigfoot Adventure Weekend, our second Bigfoot Adventure Weekend, the second weekend in August here in Bailey. And you can read about that on our website or at BigfootAdventureWeekends.com.
Okay, since Ross has not spoken yet, Suzanne, if I can wait one more for you, let Ross come in here.
Yes. So yeah, thank you, Jim, very much for great presentation. I do have a comment, a personal comment, and then I have a question for you. So my personal comment is I have came upon an individual that looks like they are communicating, actually visited their world. It is a parallel reality to us. And basically everything confirms what you have just stated. They can disappear, appear, they can communicate telepathically. They basically have a family units, family existence like we have. So this is not their world. They have another parallel world. So they just a visitor to this world, and looks like they have been, I guess so, visiting us and been, I guess so, evolving along our side through many of our seeding of our species here on this planet. So that's my statement. The question is, it's kind of not related. So last time I was at your museum, you have shown me this incredible picture of this horse with those wonderful braids. And you have, so can you a little bit, elaborate to everybody, because this is quite, so everybody, I think so I will recommend and encourage to please visit Jim's museum, because just looking this picture of this horse and those braids, it's quite amazing. So if you could, Jim, maybe elaborate. So that's all.
This is a phenomenon that we've been aware of for a number of years. It's happening all over the country, where horses that are pastured outside in pasture, that are brought in to feed or to vet or whatever, the owners are finding their manes are braided. It's always two braids leading to one braid. Always starts at the base of the mane at the neck. Can be quite intricate. And I have two examples of those braids. One from a horse I used to own that I cut the braid off this past summer. Another from Oregon. Very intricate, where the braids come down, and sometimes then it's tied into another loop. I've had people get on Facebook and accuse me that no, I have horses, their manes get messed up and this is just natural. Trust me, if you look closely at these, you'll agree there's no way these happened naturally. The other thing about the braids is they're clean. They're not filled with briars and grass. The braids themselves are clean. When I cut the braid off my horse's mane, I looked at a dozen other horses in the pasture. None of them were braided, just the one horse. And we don't know who does it or how they do it, but I can't imagine many horses allowing a stranger to walk up to them at night and braid their mane and stand there still while their mane is braided. So there's a lot of information on it. If you look it up, a horse mane braiding, you can see lots of photos of that phenomenon that still remains a mystery to us.
Okay, we'll go to Suzanne now, and then Angelia after that.
And me.
Okay.
And then Paula.
Okay. Jim, early in your presentation, you talked about blood samples that were taken. Can you summarize the results, the DNA results, how different or similar they are to humans, or what did they conclude?
Sure, the blood samples were concluded the same thing as the tissue and hair, that the blood came from a human hybrid. If they did the full genome spectrum on it, both the nuclear DNA and the mitochondrial DNA, it always came out the same. Mitochondrial was human, the nuclear was unknown, does not appear in the database anywhere. And so it's a mix of human with an unknown. There's a number of cases of interbreeding between Sasquatch and humans that have been recounted over the centuries. So apparently, if that's possible, they're close enough to us genetically for a viable offspring to come out of a union of a human and a Sasquatch. But Sasquatch themselves seems to be a human hybrid.
Okay, we're going to move to Angie and then Paula and back to Suzanne if you have another one.
Nope.
Okay, Angie.
Hi again, Jim. I don't know if you remember me or not, but I was on a camp trip with you and
Yes.
Jason
Yes.
and Connie.
Now that you mention it, I do.
And that was, I was curious and I was open, and within seconds of landing in camp, I discovered a Sasquatch were quite real. And I don't know if you remember Jason talking about, he called him Elvis, was a young teen Sasquatch. I've gone on to develop a really beautiful relationship with him. I actually call him Mozart because he comes to me whenever I play music. And I've had a huge number of experiences with him now and his family. And it is, they run in small family groups, although sometimes different, several family groups will come together. And I took my mystery school up in the woods one night, and we had about 3 family groups converge. And here's a little something you might, I don't know if you know about them or not, but they can bilocate into human beings. And we had them bilocate into our tent and come into, actually my boyfriend, and hang out in our ceremony. So, and there's a lot more I could say, of course, but I just wanted to give you an update that.
Yeah, I remember the camp out. I sure do.
Yeah, that's turned into a very beautiful and large friendship for me. And
Great.
they contact me even in town. So, yeah, just wanted to share that with
Thank you for sharing that.
Great comment. For anybody that doesn't know Angie, she's a light worker in Boulder. That's pretty amazing. So that I tend to believe that. Paula, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this presentation, Jim. It was really, really good. But, you know, we're into UFOs, and I'm wondering if there's any UFO sightings around Sasquatch. So I have to ask that question.
Yes, there are. It's not uncommon to have UFO sightings near the time or the location of a Bigfoot sighting, or to have orbs accompany Bigfoot sightings, orbs that float through camp. The same camping trip I was with Angie, during the night, Jason and I were awoken at 3 a.m. by a Sasquatch, what we believe was a Sasquatch around the tent. And then shortly after that happened, a light shone down on top of our tent for about 15 seconds. It was definitely from above. It was not from the side like a flashlight. Shone down on the tent and then disappeared. And I still don't know what it was, but it was not anything that anyone in our camp generated, because the tent was taller than me. I could stand up, so it would have been impossible for someone to get up high enough to shine a light down on top of the tent. And it was 3 a.m. anyway. So yes, UFO and Bigfoot, there's a definite connection. How deep or how far back, I couldn't say, but yes, that definitely happens.
Do you have any photos of all of this?
I don't.
Okay.
Okay, got another question from Joe.
You mentioned, thank you. You mentioned the dog man, Jim, and You know, when you look at the hieroglyphics and the Egyptian stuff, the way you described it reminded me a lot of, which would I guess be related to the reptilians in their looks with their heads and their feet and everything else. Have you, again, I'm asking, have you made a correlation between that, or can you explain a little bit more about the Dogman?
Well, I don't know nearly as much about them as I do Sasquatch. I have made that remark that they look very similar to many of the Egyptian figures in the hieroglyphics, which have a dog head of some type. I have friends that have images of them. One in particular from Tennessee, who typically, when he goes out, he has a GoPro facing back and a GoPro facing forward. He's caught a lot of things on that back camera, one of which seemed to be a Dogman. It was at a feeding station. He was dealing with the feeding station. In the bushes behind him, you can clearly see a figure. It had to have been at least 6 feet up, erect ears, muzzle, looking at him, watching him from behind. And the bizarre thing about that is it appears that there was a small creature sitting on the shoulder of this Dogman-like creature. That's the small creature's mouth was opening and closing like it was talking. It's a very unusual video, but he also had seen a Dogman in a tree on another occasion, watching him. They never made any aggressive move towards him, but I've heard of other stories, other interviews I've listened to where they've attacked people, people shot at them. The bullets seem to have no effect on the Dogman, which is another interesting aspect of how is that possible. But they seem to deflect bullets. So I hope I don't meet one.
But yet they're out in the woods, similar to Sasquatch.
Yes, yes, apparently.
Okay, we've got time for one short one left. If you want to go ahead, Ben.
My name is Ben, and my friend Noah and I run Bigfoot Club at our high school.
We're not able to hear you, Ben.
Course study,
We're not able to hear you, Ben.
Oh, you're not? Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes? Oh, hold
Yes.
on now. I can't hear you guys. All right, awesome. Sorry. My name is Ben, and my friend Noah and I run Bigfoot Club at our high school. And this is great course study for us, especially for Bigfoot Club meetings. Can you guys hear us?
Yep.
Hi, can you guys hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. Some technical difficulties. My friend Noah and I run Bigfoot Club at our high school, and this has been great course study for us for some of our meetings. And we were really intrigued by the story around Steamboat with Luther. And we were wondering if there was any context why they might have said that name or that word in particular.
No, we don't know, but my friend who I was camping with went back to the same place the next weekend, and he arrived at the exact same campsite, and he got out of his car, and just for the hell of it, he just yelled, "Luther!" And immediately there were 2 tree knocks in reply to him yelling that. We don't know what it means. It's a little risky yelling back things that you think you heard Sasquatch say because you don't know what they were saying. You might be saying, I'm in heat, come and get me. Who knows what you're saying? But I don't want to say things to Sasquatch that I don't know what they mean. So, yeah, he tried it and he got a response. So nothing else happened that second weekend other than that one reply.
Okay, well, with that, it's almost 8:30. I think this completes our event for tonight. Jim, I hope you've had a good time. We have.
I have.
I want to make sure that Daphne knows that we appreciate all her work on the Sasquatch Outpost as well. Don't forget, everybody, to mark your calendars for February the 26th at 6 p.m. And you may want to put a pen and paper beside your bed tonight, just in case the Sasquatch consciousness visits your dream state. So, on
Yes.
behalf of Paula, Ross, Julia, Cynthia, Marianne, and me, good night, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Jim. Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Mm,
You.
thank you.
Good night.
I'm dying to go downstairs and have dinner now. All right.